Very good afternoon, one and all. Without wasting much time, I will directly go to the presentation today. I'm here to tell you all a very small story. One night, there was this man who was walking alone on the roads. After a few steps, he suddenly froze. He saw a snake crawling towards him. He started having some palpitations, he started feeling very anxious, and then he actually realized that his brain and the mind wants to scream a word, and that is danger. Right then, a car passes by, and the light of the car falls on the ground. And in that light, he suddenly sees that the snake has disappeared. He realized that this was not a snake that he was seeing, but this was just a brown, harmless rope. Nothing in the world actually changed except that one thought or that narrative that was happening inside his brain. What is that one narrative, which tried to actually show him a dangerous snake instead of that one harmless rope? This is what my next slides are going to explain us, and let us understand what these concepts are. Talking about Maya, an ancient Indian philosophy, Maya is a concept that talks about how our brain never experiences anything directly. It says that our brain experiences everything through our mind. The modern science and psychiatry, they actually introduce the word illusion, and they define it as a false perception of reality. Now, what is common between Maya and the false perception of reality, that is illusion? The common thing is, in both these concepts, there is a narrative inside your brain which is constantly trying to tell you something and trying to convince you to believe what it is saying. Now let's talk about how these illusions are actually formed. Basically, the neuroscience tells us that every time there is a perception, or every time your brain is actually looking into something, it is sending some signals through the sense organs to the brain. But the interesting aspect is that the brain is never getting the actual reality what is there. So basically, your sense organs are sending some faulty signals which are incomplete, and now it expects your brain to jump and actually start looking at what these signals are. Now let's try to understand what I just said from the first example. So basically, this man was walking, and his sense organ, his eye, sent his brain some incomplete sensations or signals. So probably it sent him something in brown color, something that is long, something that is thin, and then the brain had to come forward and the brain had to actually think, what is this? Something which is brown, something that is long, and then the brain jumped into a conclusion that this could be a snake. So every time your sense organs are seeing something and sending signals to the brain, it is your brain which is acting as a prediction machine where it is constantly trying to guess. It is trying to guess what is happening outside. It is trying to guess if what I guessed is correct compared to the signals that are coming. So this is how the brain actually accepts or predicts anything that is happening inside. Now, this is the top-down or the bottom-up process, what I just said in a much more simplified manner. So basically, down below is your sense organ. Your sense organ is seeing some objects and it is sending some hints to the brain up. And now the brain is not ready to wait for all those signals to come, so the brain comes forward and then it says, okay, let me just guess what it is. How is the brain guessing it? Probably from the old memory that the brain has or the past experiences that the brain has, the brain starts to guess what this is. And in the first story, like I said, the brain guessed it wrong. Now, does it always happen that the brain guesses it wrong? Not really. Now, let's try to read what is probably on this slide. I'm sure all of you in your mind could be reading what this is. So this says that Do you find this simple to read? Because of the phenomenal power of the human mind, most people do. So now when you look into this slide, you understand that the sensory signal is very weak because it's all jumbled words. But how could you actually read? That's because your brain came forward, used its past experience, and tried to bring into some meaning into what this slide actually is. So this is not the only time where your brain is jumping forward, but a lot of our day-to-day activities, your brain comes forward and tries to give a meaning. What are these activities? So now if you look into this particular slide, there is a notice written on the door. Though the notice, has some jumbled words, your brain already understood what it is and already found the meaning of what this is. Similarly, if you look into the second slide, there are two people standing opposite each other and both of them are wearing a mask. The boy is trying to identify who is behind that mask even without getting the right kind of a sensation. So your brain is actually again predicting who that person is. Similarly, if you look into the next slide, walking in the dark. I'm sure all of us have done this. At some point when you're walking in the dark, there is no sensory signal because it's very dark. But your brain is actually predicting where the next step is, and without falling, it is actually taking you upstairs. Similarly, when you're driving on a curvy road, when the curve comes, the brain immediately tells you to slow down. And similarly, when there is a falling object, I'm sure all of us must have experienced this, where your hand suddenly goes, you don't even know where it's actually falling, but your hand suddenly goes and tries to protect that object. So in all these examples that I'm giving you, it is not your sensory organ that is helping you, but it is your brain that is coming forward and actually predicting what could be happening. All good till here, your brain is able to predict whatever the things are, and it is helping you in your day-to-day activities. But is there a problem sometimes with this over-prediction that the brain is doing? Actually, yes. Now, if you look into this particular slide, when the prediction refuses correction. So let me give you an example. There's a patient of mine who goes to the hospital every now and then because he feels there is a tumor inside his brain. He's got multiple tests done, multiple doctors, multiple MRIs, all of them say no. But unfortunately, his brain is not ready to correct the initial prediction. So every time he has a headache, he believes there is a tumor and he goes. So this is what an anxiety disorder looks like. The next thing, when there is a self-illusion that is becoming fixed. So let's try to take an example. There is a person who's actually feeling worthless because they failed in an exam. And now this feeling of worthlessness is so fixed that anything good happens in their life, he still believes that, no, this could be just luck, but I continue to believe that I am worthless. So this is a fixed illusion. Similarly, there is illusion of control. A lot of times we see mothers, trying to control their children, believing that unless I control, my child is not going to get better in life. So that is an illusion of control, what we see in OCDs. At the same time, in psychotic illnesses, we see an illusion of the meaning becoming rigid. Like probably I'm listening on the radio, the newsreader says, be alert, there's a cyclone, and I start feeling, okay, he's asking only me to be alert. That means there is some harm happening to me. So this is what a person with psychosis feels like. So now, in all the 4 examples that I've given, we clearly understand that the brain predicting without correcting it is what the major issue is. And this is what today mental health issues are all about. Mental health issues are all about how your brain is constantly creating these narratives inside your brain and how you start continuing to believe it that, oh, everything that I'm listening, everything that my brain is telling is actually true. And this is one of the major causes why people end up in diagnosis like anxieties, depressions, OCDs, phobias, or insomnias. In all these conditions, you clearly see a very negative brain prediction that is happening. What is that we should be doing? Should we leave this prediction this way? Absolutely not. Is there a way that we can actually make these predictions a little more flexible where the brain is ready to actually accept? And this is where I introduce the concept of psychotherapy or counseling that we do, and I'm also trying to merge it a little with what the Bhagavad Gita says. So the first thing I want to talk about is become the witness, that is Sakshi Bhava. Now let me give you an example. I call a friend of mine and my friend does not answer the call. The first thought that comes into my head is he ignoring me? And now I go onto the WhatsApp and I see him online. And now my thought becomes all the more stronger. But now let's try to see what really happens inside the brain. The brain hates uncertainty. What is the uncertainty? I called him up, he did not answer. My brain is not very sure why he did not answer. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions coming. My brain can't take that uncertainty, so it starts narrating its own stories. And one of the stories that it told me is, probably he's ignoring you. And then it might also tell me that, if you remember the last time when you all met, he was ignoring somebody else's call, probably right now he's doing that to you. But now, what should we be doing to deal with this kind of a faulty prediction? We need to check what is that we know for sure. I know two things for sure. I called him and he did not answer. But beyond that, I do not have an evidence to anything that I'm saying. When I don't have an evidence, I ask a reality question. Is there any time that I could have probably missed somebody's call? Oh yes. What could be the reason? There was once when I was in a meeting, there was once when I was showering, there was once when I was fast asleep. So there are other reasons that could be why the brain actually, or why the person actually does not answer the call. So now I try to put that reality question and say that maybe there is a possibility that he also could be busy. And this is where I change the initial sentence where I felt that he was ignoring me, and I say that I called him up, he did not answer the call, probably he could be busy. So this is one way of actually changing how your cognitive distortions or your faulty thinking patterns are. Similarly, there is a second concept called ahankara in Bhagavad Gita, which is also known as disidentify from the I story. If you actually notice, your brain always causes a narration saying I am worthless, I have failed, I am useless, I am a failure, I will never get better in life. But you actually need to realize this I concept is a permanent thing. This failure, passing, success is not something that is permanent. So you need to learn to diffuse both of them and look at these two things as two different entities. And that is where the whole concept of naming it as a thought, instead of saying I am a failure, I say my brain tells me, or my brain is creating a thought that I could be a failure. At the same time, I change the grammar and then I say this is only a thought, this is not me. And then I ask the distance question. Can I just observe it, just like how I'm watching a movie? Instead of actually going and jumping into that thought and making that thought mine, I would want to just observe that thought. Probably I will like to observe it like the passing clouds. Or I would like to imagine this thought on a leaf floating away in the water. And this is how you actually try to distance yourself from the thought. The third concept here is seeing the pattern or the samskaras. I have a client who comes to me and tells me, "Doctor, I feel anxious, but I don't know why." I asked her to write a journal. After a few days, she came back and she understood that the anxiety comes every time she touches the phone. I asked her to again go back and write the journal. She came back and told me that my anxiety is when I get a phone call from unknown people and not from everybody. Now, this particular concept of getting a call from unknown people is not, her fear is not got to do with the phone, or it's not got to do with talking on the phone, but the fear has been coming from her childhood, where there was an unknown person who called and spoke about a death that happened in the family. And now every time there is an unknown person calling, her brain going back into that pattern. So now she is relieved about using the phone and she has understood what the pattern is. So we need to understand that Repeated reactions strengthen these mental grooves. So repeatedly, she being constantly worried has made that thought very strong. And illusions are learned, and they are not facts. So this illusion that she is having is learned from childhood, but it is not truly a fact. So this is where we try to understand what is troubling somebody for the last 15, 20 years with just some techniques like journaling. The next thing is karma yoga, where we tell to act without an attachment. Let us take a simple example. I decide to exercise and lose weight. Now, my goal is losing weight. Now, if I attach to that outcome of losing weight, every time my weighing scale shows me a little higher, I start becoming demotivated. That's where I don't want to attach to the result, but I want to attach to a more better core value. That core value is, I would like to exercise for my health. And now the side effect of that can be losing weight, which I'm happy with. So this is how, when you try to remove your attachment with the result, you are able to do the act much better. And then equanimity or samatva. This is where we talk about how you regulate your emotions, not to get too happy or not to get too sad in particular given situation. This comes through practices like mindfulness and guided meditation. And then we talk about the concept of abhyasa, the last one, that is knowledge and wisdom. What does this abhyasa tell us? Abhyasa tells us that illusions don't disappear instantly. This constant thoughts that we all get during stressful situations, that I'm a failure, I might be, I'll never be successful, or this is how my life is going to be, I'm always going to be alone. These are all illusions and they won't disappear instantly. This is going to happen through practice, and wisdom is stabilized through practice, and this is also called as neuroplasticity. The more you train your brain with these kinds of practices about changing the way your brain is thinking, you are going to achieve a state where all these illusions have actually come down to a greatest level. So the Gita calls it Maya, psychology calls it as cognitive construct. Freedom begins the moment you stop arguing with your thoughts and just start observing these thoughts. So the last slide. You can't stop the illusion, but you can stop being fooled by it. And this ability to stop being fooled by these illusions can come with the practices that we have discussed. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.